Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and we are back with more Eats, Shoots, and Leaves. Yeah, we are officially getting into chapter 3 today, which is Airs and Graces. So, let's do this. When I was about 14 years old, a friend at school who spent summer holidays in Michigan set me up with an American pen pal. This is not an episode I am proud to remember. In fact, one day I hope to be able to forget it. The ensuing correspondence, after all, ran to only 3 pages, and no one from Oxford University Press has, as yet, suggested collecting it in book form with scholarly apparatus and footnotes. But for the time being, I need to get it off my chest, so here it is. The trouble was, Carrie Ann was an everyday teenager with no literary pretensions, and for some reason, this made the precocious blue stocking in me feverishly uncomfortable. When her first letter arrived, she had pluckily set the ball rolling. I was absolutely appalled. It was in huge handwriting, like an infant's. It was on pink paper with carefree spelling errors, and where the dots over the I's ought to be, there were bubbles. I am strawberry blonde, she wrote, with a light dusting of freckles. In hindsight, I see it was unrealistic to expect a pen pal from the 8th grade in Detroit to write like Samuel Johnson. But on the other hand, what earthly use to me was this vapid, mousy moron parading a pigmentational handicap? To this day, I am ashamed of what I did to Carrie Ann, who unsurprisingly never wrote back. I replied to her childish letter on grown-up deckled green paper with a fountain pen. Whether I actually donned a velvet smoking jacket for the occasion, I can't remember, but I know I deliberately dropped the word desultory, and I think I may have even used some French. Pretentious? Well, to adapt Gustave Flaubert's famous identification with Emma Bovary, Adrian Mollet avait des traits uns et trois quoi c'est moi. The main reason I recall this shameful teenage epiphany, however, is that my mission to blast little Carrie Ann out of the water, I pulled out literally all the stops. I used a semicolon. I watch television in a desultory kind of way. I find there is not much on, I wrote, and it felt so good, you know. It felt fantastic. It was like that bit of Crocodile Dundee when our rugged hero scoffs at the switchblade of his would-be mugger and produces a foot-long weapon of his own. Call that a knife? That's a knife. In this chapter, I want to examine punctuation as an art. Naturally, therefore, this is where the colon and semicolon waltz in together to a big cheer from all the writers in the audience. Just look at those glamorous punctuation marks twirling in the lights from the glitter ball. Are they not beautiful? Are they not graceful? Ask professional writers about punctuation and they will not start striking the board about the misuse of the apostrophe. Instead, they will jabber on in a rather breathless manner about the fate of the semicolon. Is it endangered? What will we do if it disappears? Have you noticed that newspapers use it less and less? Save the semicolon. It is essential to our craft, but their strength of attachment is justified. Taking the marks we have examined so far, is there any art involved in using the apostrophe? No. Using the apostrophe correctly is a mere negative proof. It tells the world you are not a thicko. The comma, while less subject to universal rules, is still a utilitarian mark, racing about with its ears back, trying to serve both the sense and the sound of the sentence. And of course, wearing itself to a frazzle for a modest bowl of chum. Using the comma well announces that you have an ear for sense and rhythm, confidence in your style, and a proper respect for your reader. But it does not mark you out as a master of your craft. But colons and semicolons, well, they are in a different league, my dear. They give such lift. Assuming a sentence rises into the air with an initial capital letter and lands with a softish bump at the full stop, the humble comma can keep the sentence aloft all right, like this. Up, for hours if necessary. Up, like this. Up, sort of bouncing, and then falling down, and then up it goes again, assuming you have enough additional things to say, although in the end you may run out of ideas and then you have to roll along the ground with no commas at all until some sort of surface resistance takes over and you run out of steam anyway, and then eventually, with the help of 3 dots, you stop. But the thermals that benignly waft our sentences to new altitudes, that allow us to coast on air and loop the loop, suspending the laws of gravity, well, they are colons and semicolons. If you don't believe me, ask Virginia Woolf. As for the other experiences, the solitary ones, which people go through alone, in their bedrooms, in their offices, walking the fields and the streets of London, he had them. He had left home a mere boy because of his mother. She lied. Because he came down to tea for the 50th time with his hands unwashed. Because he could see no future for a poet in Stroud. And so, making a confidant of his little sister, had gone to London, leaving an absurd note behind him, such as great men have written, and the world has read later when the story of their struggles has become famous. Virginia Woolf, Mrs. Dalloway, 1925. Look at the sentence fly. Amazing. The way it stays up like that. Would anyone mind if I ate the last sandwich? Of course, nothing is straightforward in the world of literary taste. Just as there are writers who worship the semicolon, there are other high stylists who dismiss it, who label it, if you please, middle class. James Joyce referred to the colon as more authentically classical. P.G. Wodehouse did an effortlessly marvelous job without it. George Orwell tried to avoid the semicolon completely in Coming Up for Air in 1939, telling his editor in 1947, "I had decided about this time that the semicolon is an unnecessary stop and that I would write my next book without one." Martin Amis included just one semicolon in Money, 1984, and was afterwards more than usually pleased with himself. The American writer Donald Barthelme wrote that the semicolon is ugly, ugly as a tick on a dog's belly. Faye Weldon said she positively dislikes semicolons, which is odd because I don't dislike anybody, really. Meanwhile, that energetic enemy to all punctuation, Gertrude Stein, remember she said the comma was servile, said that semicolons suppose themselves superior to the comma but are mistaken. They are more powerful, more imposing, more pretentious than a comma, but they are a comma all the same. They really have within them, deeply within them, fundamentally within them, the comma nature. Gertrude Stein, Poetry and Grammar, 1935. But how much notice should we take of those pompous sillies who denounce the semicolon? I say none at all. I say they are just show-offs, and I say it's wonderful that the Umberto Eco was congratulated by an academic reader for using no semicolons in The Name of the Rose, 1983, he cheerfully explained. So the apocryphal story goes that the machine he typed The Name of the Rose on simply didn't have a semicolon, so it was slightly unwise of this earnest chap to make too much of it. Non-writers are wary of both the colon and the semicolon, though partly because all this rarefied debate rages above their heads. Eric Partridge, in his 1953 book, You Have a Point There, says that using colons in your writing is the equivalent of playing the piano with crossed hands. But sadly, anyone lazily looking for an excuse not to master the colon and semicolon can always locate a respectable reason, because so many are advanced. Here are some of the most common. 1. They are old-fashioned. 2. They are middle class. 3. They are optional. 4. They are mysteriously connected to pausing. 5. They are dangerously addictive. Vide Virginia Woolf. 6. The difference between them is too negligible to be grasped by the brain of man. I hope we shall happily demolish all these objections in the following pages, But it is worth remarking that Fleet Street style gurus fly the flag for most of the prejudices listed above, especially as applied to the semicolon, a mark they increasingly strike out with puritanical gusto. The semicolon has currently fallen out of fashion with newspapers, the official reason being the readers of newsprint prefer their sentences short, their paragraphs bite-sized, and their columns of type uncluttered by wormy squiggles. It's more likely that the real reasons are pathetic editorial confusion about usage and a policy of distrusting contributors when they demonstrably know their onions. But hey ho, there is no point to trying to turn the clock back. The great theater critic James Agate, in his diary for 1935, recorded how a notoriously fastidious fellow journalist once telephoned a semicolon from Moscow. Well, you could imagine the reception he would get today. But that ends that particular section. With that said, let's go ahead and look at some of the in-depth moments in here. She talks about being a little too high society and snooty with her pen palship, her correspondence with Carrie Ann. They were young, because she's talking about 8th grade. You're still learning a lot of things, but yeah. Quoting French, using words desultory, and talking about she refers to it similar in to the way Crocodile Dundee does, which is a famous scene in the movie. Muggers come up to him and they've got a switchblade. Give me your money. Crocodile Dundee, this Australian guy new to the U.S., he says, "You call that a knife?" This, and he pulls out one of these foot-long, foot and a half serrated, blades. That's a knife. There. But then she goes on about the semicolon and its usage. She's saying there's so much you can do. And then she says the comma, it can give you a little bit of a bounce and keep it going along the sentence from whence you start. Because she goes, assuming a sentence rises into the air with the initial capital letter and lands with a softish bump at the full stop, comma, the humble comma can keep the sentence aloft all right, comma, like this, comma, up, comma, for hours if necessary, comma, up, comma, like this, comma, up, comma, sort of bouncing, comma, and then falling down, comma, and then up it goes again, comma, assuming you have enough additional things to say, comma, although in the end you may run out of ideas and then you have to roll along the ground with no commas at all until some sort of surface resistance takes over and you run out of steam anyway. And then eventually, with the help of three dots, ... you stop. Period. Full stop. Kind of mixing, showing how the comma can keep things going, but without it, it's just... yeah. But she talks about how some people write Gertrude Stead. The section she gave about her, there is not a comma one. It is 2 sentences. Period. And like I said, it goes, they are more powerful, more imposing, more pretentious than a comma, but they are a comma all the same. They really have within them, deeply within them, fundamentally within them, the common nature. Which, honestly, irks me a bit, because it's like, you don't stop if there's not some kind of form of... Take a moment. Take a half second. You know, that's the whole point of punctuation. It's like, learn to punctuate. I don't care how famous of a writer you think you are. But yeah. But we'll go ahead and end everything there. As always, educate thyself. Think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. I'll see you all in the next video. Until then, later.